Hi guys, welcome to this video. I'm going over challenges of an urbanising world today for the GCSE Edexcel exam. And I'm going to be talking you through the main key terms and looking at some case studies. So this unit is about challenges in cities, basically rich and poor cities. So there's lots of key terminology, lots of things that you need to know, a few little case studies. So I'm going to do the major the general stuff first, and then I'll do a separate video on Mumbai because it's a bit longer. So let's start off with a key term, urbanisation. So the world is getting more urbanised, which means that more people are moving to cities. Urbanisation means people moving to cities and living in cities rather than the countryside. People are moving to the cities because there's more job opportunities, there's better services, people perceive that there's better opportunities and quality of life there. But as we'll see, sometimes there is and sometimes there isn't. So the growth of cities, we've seen a huge increase in city growth over the last 20 or 30 years. And very soon, there'll be well over 50% of all the world's population living in cities for the reasons that I've just said. So urbanisation is huge. Like I said, people, especially in poorer countries, we've got something called hyper-urbanisation that happens in poorer countries. We don't so much see it in richer countries because they already have quite big populations. But in poorer countries, we see many, many people moving from the rural areas to the urban areas for better job opportunities, etc. So that's hyper-urbanisation. Now, another couple of key terms, megacity, that is a city that has got over 10 million people. So New York, Mumbai, a lot of the Chinese cities, etc., all got over 10 million people. Again, lots of them tend to be in China now, and lots of them tend to be in poorer low-income countries because, like I said, there's a huge amount of people who are moving from rural to urban areas. Next term is a world city. Now, a world city is a city that has kind of a disproportionate influence over a country. So London would be a world city, as would New York, as would Paris. Now, world cities tend to be very important in terms of their function, and they've got what we call urban primacy quite often, which means they're a lot bigger than the next city down. So the UK is a good example of this. London's got around about 7-8 million people, with Greater London about 17 million. But the next city is Birmingham, which has got 1 million people. So we've got urban primacy. London has urban primacy. So the cities are centres for investment banks will be there, and headquarters will be there. Airline traffic will be big there, so there'll be lots of airlines going into all of those airports. We've got lots of airports in London. Decision making, so TNC headquarters, political decisions, the centre of government will be there. So they're very influential. Okay, so world cities are very, very influential. Megacity just means that it's got over 10 million people, but world city means it's got more influence. So they are our first 4 terms. Right, so in the book now, we can see that we go on to looking at several cities. So I'm going to look at a range of cities. The first one is an LIC city, and it's Kampala in the book, but you can use any really. And Kampala really has got a lot of internal migration because people, Uganda is a fairly poor country, an LIC. So there's a lack of job opportunities, quality of life, etc. in the countryside. So you've got a huge amount of people who are moving from the rural areas into the urban areas. So that's what's happening here. There's a growth, obviously, because it is a city. There is a growth in business and tertiary. So people are flocking to those countries in order to try to find a job. But they don't all find a job because, obviously, if you're from a rural area, then you've probably got limited skills and limited education. Okay, our next one is our HIC, and this is an example of New York, which is a HIC that's growing. Obviously, similar to London. So if you think of London here, although this is about world geography, so I'm not sure if you can use your London, but London very similar to New York, where we've got the growth of tertiary knowledge economy, finance, banking, headquarters of TNCs, etc. So this country, this city, I should say, is growing quite rapidly. People are also moving out, so the population growth isn't so big as it would be in a poorer country. So New York has got lots of overseas migrants as well. So that's a characteristic of migration and movement into richer country cities, is that you'll have lots of high-skilled and low-skilled migrants move into that city. Next, and I'll look at cities, is a Detroit, which is in America, obviously. Now, this is an example of a city that is going into decline because not all cities grow. Now, this is due to our next key term, which is deindustrialization, which, if we remember, means that the global shift has happened, and manufacturing in particular has moved abroad into China, into Southeast Asia, etc. So these cities like Detroit and a lot of the cities in the UK up north have gone through decline. So the industry has declined, and there's been job losses, and there has been a spiral of decline because people have moved out because there's not enough job opportunities, etc. So different cities are doing different things. So if you remember, New York is mostly growing, and we've got the knowledge economy, and we've got the tertiary economy, and we've got quaternary jobs there. And then Detroit is in decline because that city is going through, or has gone through, deindustrialization. So cities are doing different things. We've got changes to cities. Okay, so that's changes in cities. Our next little section is on what the economies are in different cities, and we've got slightly different case studies here in the book. So first of all, I want to look through within the city. The economy is either divided into formal or informal. So formal means that the people are paying taxes. It means that it is a formal job, like most of us do in the UK. But the informal sector in poorer countries is huge, because obviously there's lots and lots of people move to the cities. There's not enough job opportunities. So people tend to do jobs that are not taxed. They're not regulated. They're selling goods that they've made, or selling goods on the streets, or involved in businesses which aren't taxed and aren't formal. Okay, so we've seen that if you've watched the Kevin McLeod videos on Mumbai, we see lots of jobs in the informal sector when it goes into Dharavi. So we'll look at that a little bit more closely when we go into Mumbai in another video. So Kampala is our example here again in Uganda, and Kampala is a developing country, so it's a poorer country. And here it's got a large economy, but I think the book says that 80% of the people in Kampala work in the informal sector. So we've got many, many people in poorer countries and LICs where we've got huge amounts of people employed in the informal sector. The formal economy is growing, okay, because it's a city, but it's not growing very fast because obviously many people in Uganda are involved in agriculture. So it's only growing quite slowly. Obviously in those kind of countries as well, if there's maybe the government's not as stable and there's not as many TNCs moving in, then you're not going to get that growth within the manufacturing sector because TNCs aren't attracted to those countries. So there's a slow growth in manufacturing and tertiary industry. Our next example is New Delhi, but you can use Mumbai here as well. It doesn't really matter. And obviously that's growing quite rapidly because it's an emerging country. So remember, India's emerging, and that means that it's got lots of positive factors that will encourage TNC movement there and FDI. So we've got people speaking English, we've got some people who are educated, we've got big workforce, young workforce. So those countries are growing, and manufacturing and the knowledge economy is growing there in terms of working for call centres and things like that. I covered that in the last video that I did as well. And then the final one is New York, which is a developed country obviously, and it's got huge amounts of industry in each sector. Okay, so huge amounts of knowledge economy here as well, because obviously New York is also a world city. So many, many people will move there from abroad, lots of foreign migrants, lots of people who are going to work for TNCs, etc. So a huge amount of migrants. Now, there's still legal and illegal migrants in America. So we have still got some people working in the informal sector, but it's a lot smaller. But the greatest concentration is people in kind of construction and street selling and cleaning, and in the service industry we still have some people in the informal sector. So that is economic change and economic differences in different cities. So next I'm going to go over a huge amount, well, it's not that many, of key terms related to urbanisation and growth of urban areas. So as we can see here, I'm going to work my way through these. So I'm just going to explain what these key terms are, and you need to make sure that you know them. So urbanisation means the growth of a city. So a city that becomes urbanised means that lots of people are moving into it. Suburbanisation is where people start moving to the outskirts of that city because that city has got a little bit cramped inside, or there's a lot of pollution, so people move to the suburbs. And rich people tend to move to the suburbs because they can afford the larger houses. They tend to be larger houses because there's more land there, etc. And then they can travel into the centre of the city to work. So that is suburbanisation. So the city's growing, but it's due to people moving from the centre into the suburbs, or people just move into the suburbs. Then we've got counter-urbanisation, which means that once the city becomes too cramped and too awful to live in, with high rates of crime or high rates of pollution, congestion, etc., then people tend to counter-urbanise, which means move out of the city. We've seen a lot of counter-urbanisation in the UK, with big TNCs and things like that moving out. So the BBC, for example, moved up north to Salford, and we had a lot of counter-urbanisation because people will move out. They want a better quality of life, etc., than what they've got in a city. Then we have got regeneration. So the city can go into decline because of all these problems that we just said. And so what the government do is they regenerate areas of the city, which means that those areas that have gone into decline, normally the inner city areas, they make them better. So they rebuild, they regenerate, they improve the transport systems. Good example of this, I know it's the UK, but is the Olympic Park and Newham and Canary Wharf. So all of those places, although we shouldn't really use those in the exam, are examples of places where we have regeneration. And then finally, we've got brownfield sites. So a brownfield site is where we've had development before, and then we get redevelopment. So Canary Wharf is a good example of this. So the docks closed down, brownfield site, the LDDC came in and rebuilt Canary Wharf on a brownfield site. Okay, it's often more environmentally friendly sometimes because you're not using a greenfield site, but it can be really expensive because you have to redo and undo what's happened there in the first place. So they're all our key terms connected to urbanisation. Next lot of key terms I'm going to look at is the structure of a city. So we've got 4 different parts of the city, so I'm just going to go over those. The CBD is obviously the central area. That's characterised by high tall buildings, expensive land use, good transport links, etc. We often get questions on that. The inner city area tends to be where we've had manufacturing in the past, and we've had the global shift. That manufacturing is closed down, and we have got regeneration. So this area is kind of a mix of rich and poor, because we've got areas that haven't been regenerated that are in decline, and we've got areas that have been regenerated that are better. So this is characterised by regeneration, by places that are not doing so well, so maybe high crime, high population density, etc. And then we've got good transport links still here, and cheaper land, expensive land use, I should say, expensive land. So we tend to get quite small flats and small buildings here. Then the suburbs is outside the inner city, so that's where we have our housing estates and our semi-detached houses and things like that. So that's where maybe richer people might live. And then we've got the rural urban fringe, which is basically the transition between the town and the city. So that's got good transport links. It tends to be where our kind of out of town shopping centres are located, etc. And we have got kind of a transition between countryside and city there. So they are our key terms. So I'm going to finish this one, and in my next video, I'm going to look at Mumbai as in one video. So please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and see you later.